"I don't think you understand. My son needs this seat," the woman hissed, her voice dripping with entitlement as she towered over Devin Harris. All he had wanted was a peaceful flight to his sister's wedding, but now every nearby passenger was staring at him, the difficult black man who wouldn't give up his window seat for a white child. This was exactly the kind of public confrontation Devin had paid extra to avoid, yet here it was, unfolding at 30,000 feet with nowhere to escape. But what happened next would leave everyone on the plane stunned into silence. Devin Harris had exhaled softly just minutes earlier as he settled into his window seat, row 23 of the packed Boeing 737. The small rectangular window wasn't much, but for the next 4 hours, it would be his personal slice of tranquility above the clouds. He'd deliberately chosen this spot, paying the extra $45 for the privilege of watching cities transform into miniature models and the sun paint the horizon in colors no artist could truly capture. He adjusted his navy blue hoodie, slipped his backpack under the seat in front of him, and pulled out his tablet. With a 6-hour layover ahead before his connecting flight to his sister's wedding, Terrell had loaded up on documentaries and a new sci-fi novel. All he wanted was some peace, some quiet, and the simple pleasure of being left alone. The boarding process continued around him, the steady stream of passengers filing down the narrow aisle, the overhead bins snapping shut, flight attendants directing traffic with practiced efficiency. Terrell plugged in his noise-canceling headphones, already mentally drifting away from the chaos. Just as he was about to start his first documentary, a sharp tap on his shoulder yanked him back to reality. "Excuse me," a woman's voice cut through, before he could even remove his headphones. "You're going to need to move." Terrell looked up, momentarily confused. Standing in the aisle was a woman who appeared to be in her late 30s, with highlighted blonde hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. Her expression was expectant, almost impatient, as if he'd already kept her waiting too long. Beside her stood a boy around 8 years old, clutching a handheld gaming device and staring at the floor. Terrell removed his headphones. "I'm sorry?" The woman, Karen Walker, according to the luggage tag dangling from her designer carry-on, sighed dramatically. "My son needs the window seat. He has anxiety about flying, and seeing outside helps calm him down." She gestured toward the aisle seat in the same row. "You can sit there instead." Terrell blinked, processing the request. It wasn't really a request, though, was it? It was a directive, delivered with absolute certainty that he would comply without question. "I specifically booked this window seat," he explained calmly. "I paid extra for it." Karen's perfectly penciled eyebrows arched in surprise, as if the possibility of refusal hadn't even occurred to her. For a brief moment, she seemed genuinely taken aback. Then her expression hardened. "We all have to make sacrifices sometimes," she said, her voice taking on a sweeter tone that didn't match her rigid posture. "It's for a child. I'm sure you understand." But Terrell did understand, perhaps more clearly than she realized. He understood that she hadn't planned ahead for her child's needs. He understood that she assumed he would accommodate without question. And he understood that her tone had shifted the moment he didn't immediately comply. "I do understand anxiety," he replied evenly. "That's why I specifically booked this seat for myself. If the window was important, you should have reserved one." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she scanned him, from his short locks to his Howard University sweatshirt, to his worn but well-kept Nikes. Something in her gaze shifted, a recalculation. "Look," she said, lowering her voice but somehow making it carry further. "My son is just a child. Surely you can show some compassion here." Devon felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the feeling that came whenever someone tried to publicly corner him, to make him the problem for simply holding his ground. Other passengers were starting to notice the exchange. Some pretended not to watch while stealing glances. Others turned in their seats without bothering to hide their interest. "I am showing compassion," Terrell responded, keeping his voice steady and his expression neutral, "by explaining why I need to keep my seat rather than just saying no." Karen's cheeks flushed. She straightened her posture and looked around, making sure nearby passengers could hear her next words. "Unbelievable," she said loudly. "Absolutely unbelievable. This is what's wrong with people today. No consideration for children." The boy beside her shifted uncomfortably, eyes still fixed on his game. He hadn't said a word or even looked up during the entire exchange. Terrell wondered if the window seat had been the child's request at all. Before he could respond, a flight attendant appeared beside them. He was a tall man with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who had seen every type of in-flight drama possible. His name tag read, Michael Chen. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice professional but firm. Karen immediately turned to him, relief washing over her face as if the cavalry had arrived. "Yes, there is," she said, pointing at Terrell. "This man refuses to let my son have the window seat. Tyler has severe anxiety, and the window helps him stay calm during the flight." Michael turned to Devon with an expression that revealed nothing. "Sir," Devon met his gaze, "this is my assigned seat. I paid extra specifically for the window." He half expected Michael to pressure him to move, to prioritize ending the conflict quickly over what was fair. It had happened before in other situations. The path of least resistance often meant asking the reasonable person to accommodate the unreasonable one. But Michael simply nodded. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" Terrell pulled up the digital pass on his phone and showed it to the flight attendant. Michael glanced at it, then turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, he's correct. This is his assigned seat." Karen's mouth opened in surprise. She clearly hadn't expected this response. "But my son, if you need a window seat," Michael continued calmly, "I can check if any are available, but I cannot ask another passenger to give up a seat they specifically paid for." The nearby passengers who had been watching the exchange with interest now seemed to hold a collective breath. Karen looked stunned, as if she'd been reading from a script and someone had suddenly changed the ending. "Are you serious right now?" she asked, her voice rising. "He's a grown man. My son is 8 years old." Michael remained unfazed. "I understand your concern, but airline policy is clear. Passengers are entitled to the seats they've purchased." Karen's composure cracked. She looked around at the other passengers, seeking allies. "Can you believe this?" she asked loudly. "A full-grown man refuses to give up his seat for an anxious child, and the airline supports him?" A few passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others avoided eye contact altogether. But Terrell noticed a middle-aged woman across the aisle watching with interest, her expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. "Ma'am," Michael said, his patience clearly wearing thin, "I need you to lower your voice and take your assigned seat so we can complete boarding." Karen wasn't ready to concede. She turned back to Terrell, her eyes narrowing. "Would it really kill you to show some basic human decency?" Terrell felt a familiar heat rise in his face, not embarrassment, but the controlled anger that came from being publicly painted as the villain for simply maintaining a boundary. He'd experienced this before in different contexts, and he knew the trap. Lose your cool, and you confirm their narrative. Stay calm, and you're difficult, My decision to keep the seat I paid for doesn't reflect on my character, he said quietly. Just as your decision not to plan ahead for your child's needs doesn't reflect on yours. We all make choices. Karen's face flushed deep red. For a moment it seemed like she might escalate further. But then the unexpected happened. The middle-aged woman across the aisle spoke up. He's right, you know, she said, her voice carrying clearly down the row. If the window seat was that important, you should have booked it in advance. That's just common sense. Karen whipped around, shocked to find someone else entering the conversation, especially someone not on her side. Excuse me? This isn't your business? You made it everyone's business when you started making a scene, the woman replied calmly. She glanced at Terrell with a small nod of solidarity. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but was cut off by another, voice 2 rows ahead. Some of us would like to take off sometime today, a man called out. Just take your assigned seats already. Michael stepped closer to Karen, his voice lower now, but no less firm. Ma'am, I need you to take your assigned seat now, or I'll have to escalate this situation to the captain. The shift in the cabin was palpable. What had started as one woman trying to pressure a single passenger had transformed into something else, a moment where the usual social script had been flipped. Karen seemed to sense it too, the way the collective energy had turned. This is ridiculous, she muttered, but her voice had lost its edge. She tugged her son's arm. Come on, Tyler. Some people just don't know how to behave in public. As they moved away toward their assigned seats, Michael turned to Devon. I apologize for the disturbance, sir. Can I get you anything before takeoff? Devon shook his head. No, thank you. I appreciate your help. Michael gave him a small nod that seemed to communicate more than just professional courtesy, a brief acknowledgement of what had really happened. Then he continued down the aisle, checking on other passengers. The woman across the aisle caught Devon's eye. You handled that well, she said. Thanks, Devon replied. Wasn't trying to create a problem. You didn't, she assured him. Some people just aren't used to hearing no. Devon nodded, slipping his headphones back on. As the plane prepared for takeoff, he glanced toward where Karen and her son were seated, several rows ahead on the opposite side. The boy was still focused on his game, seemingly unbothered by the window or lack thereof. Karen sat rigidly beside him, her back straight, pointedly not looking in Terrell's direction. It could have ended there, an uncomfortable encounter that would soon become just another travel story. But Karen Walker wasn't quite finished yet. 20 minutes into the flight, as the seatbelt signs turned off and the flight attendants began preparing for beverage service, Terrell noticed movement in his peripheral vision. Looking up from his tablet, he saw Karen standing in the aisle, her eyes fixed on him with renewed determination. Michael, who had been checking on passengers a few rows ahead, immediately noticed and changed direction, moving quickly toward her. But Karen reached Devon's row first. I hope you're enjoying your precious window, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. My son is in tears because of you. Devon glanced past her toward their seats, where Tyler was still playing his game, looking completely dry-eyed and unbothered. Several nearby passengers followed his gaze, noticing the same contradiction. Ma'am, Michael's voice came from behind her, sharper now. Return to your seat immediately. Karen ignored him, leaning closer to Devon. You know exactly what you're doing, she hissed. Playing the victim when you're just being selfish. A collective tension spread through the cabin. Devon remained silent, refusing to engage, but his hands gripped the armrests tightly. This wasn't about a seat anymore, if it ever had been. Michael placed himself between them. "That's enough," he said, his professional demeanor giving way to genuine authority. "Return to your seat now, or there will be consequences." "Consequences?" Karen repeated, her voice rising again. "For what?" "For advocating for my child while this man—" "For harassment," Michael cut her off firmly. "For creating a disturbance that impacts the safety and comfort of other passengers." A second flight attendant had appeared now, a younger woman whose name tag read Amara Johnson. She assessed the situation quickly, then spoke into her radio. "Captain, we have a situation in the main cabin." The radio crackled with a response too low for passengers to hear. Karen's eyes widened as she seemed to realize, perhaps for the first time, that this could go beyond an uncomfortable social exchange. This could have real consequences. "I'm not harassing anyone," she insisted, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "I'm just standing up for my child." "Your child appears perfectly content," Amara observed, glancing toward Tyler. "And you were asked to return to your seat." Karen looked around, perhaps searching for support, but found none. The other passengers watched with expressions ranging from annoyance to outright disapproval. The woman across the aisle shook her head slowly. "This is unbelievable," Karen muttered, but she took a step back. "The way some people get special treatment—" "Ma'am," Michael interrupted, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Return to your seat now, or we will be meeting law enforcement when we land. This is your final warning." For a moment, the entire section of the plane went silent. Karen stood frozen, caught between pride and self-preservation. Then, without another word, she turned and walked stiffly back to her seat. Michael turned to Devon. "Are you all right, sir?" Devon nodded, though his heart was still racing. "I'm fine, thank you. If there's any further issue, please press your call button immediately," Michael said before heading toward the front of the plane with Amara. The tension in the cabin slowly dissipated. Conversations resumed, though many were undoubtedly about what had just transpired. The woman across the aisle caught Devon's eye again. "Unbelievable," she said, shaking her head. "Some people just can't let things go." "Happens more often than you might think," Devon replied quietly. She studied him for a moment. "Yeah," she said finally. "I imagine it does." For the remainder of the flight, Karen stayed in her seat, her posture rigid, occasionally whispering intensely to her son, who continued to play his game, largely indifferent to whatever she was saying. Devon tried to focus on his documentary, but found his mind wandering back to the confrontation. It wasn't the first time he'd experienced something like this, someone assuming he would or should yield, then reacting with disproportionate anger when he didn't. The difference this time was that the system, in the form of Michael and the other flight attendants, had actually worked the way it was supposed to. They had upheld the rules equally, without bias. It shouldn't have felt noteworthy, but it did, as the plane began its descent 3 hours later. Devon watched the approaching cityscape through his window, the very window he'd paid extra for, the one that had somehow become a symbol of something much larger than a seat preference. The incident would soon be just another story, another experience to file away. But for now, as the ground grew closer, he allowed himself to feel a quiet satisfaction. When the plane finally taxied to the gate, and passengers began the usual rush to retrieve their belongings and exit, Devon stayed seated, in no hurry. He watched as Karen and Tyler moved quickly down the aisle, Karen deliberately avoiding eye contact with him. Tyler, for his part, finally looked up from his game long enough to glance curiously at Devon as they passed, not with any animosity, just childlike interest. As Devon finally stood to collect his backpack, Michael appeared beside him. "Sir," the flight attendant said quietly, "I want to apologize again for the disturbance." Devon shook his head. "You have nothing to apologize for. You did your job, and you did it well." Michael's expression softened slightly. "Not everyone would have handled that situation with such composure. You made our job easier." "Just trying to get to my sister's wedding without drama," Devon replied with a small smile. "Well, I hope it's a beautiful ceremony," Michael said. "Safe travels for the rest of your journey." As Devon made his way through the terminal toward his connecting gate, he couldn't help reflecting on the entire situation. What had started as a simple boundary, keeping the seat he'd paid for, had evolved into something that revealed deeper truths about expectations, entitlement, and the small ways justice sometimes prevails. It wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't even about the window seat, not really. It was about being treated with basic respect, about having the same right to space and boundaries as anyone else. And sometimes, holding your ground quietly but firmly was the most powerful statement you could make. Devon found his gate for the connecting flight, settled into a chair, and pulled out his phone to text his sister. "You won't believe what happened on my flight." This story isn't just about a man who refused to give up his airplane seat. It's about the small battles many people face daily, moments when standing your ground isn't about stubbornness, but about dignity. It's about what happens when entitlement meets its match in quiet determination. And it's about those rare, important moments when the system actually works the way it should. If you've ever been in a situation like Devon's, or like Michael's, or even like Karen's, we want to hear your story. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories that explore the complicated ways we navigate boundaries, respect, and social expectations, make sure to subscribe for notifications. Because these everyday moments, they matter more than we think.